Oh, ho, ho, Jaunty Mantis.
Whoa, we're doing that again, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's all I got really for seasonal festive fun, but it's not all the Jaunty Mantis had for seasonal festive fun. What you're about to listen to is a special episode of the Jaunty Mantis from the vaults. Maybe the second piece of audio we ever recorded.
True story. I thought this was lost. I was surprised when I found this. It is a bonus episode that we recorded with friend of the show, Rich Ranallo, co-creator of the indie glam rock RPG Velvet Generation, where he and Jesse talk about their old days LARPing Vampire the Masquerade. Am I right,
Yeah,
Jesse?
I was hoping you're gonna say the Vampire the Masquerade so people would know we were cool and not that like lightning bolt kind of LARP.
Oh, right. Yes, I'm sorry. The cool LARPing.
Yes. And for an anecdote I tell in the middle of that, don't worry, I'm fine.
Yeah, so obviously the week of Christmas, we're not going to have an episode because we're doing the holiday things with our family and friends. We hope you're enjoying your holiday, and go ahead, listen to this bonus episode. If we ever mention the word Patreon, just ignore it. We had aspirations of maybe one day doing a Patreon, which I guess is not off the table, but I don't know. Why am I trying to prep people for what might be in this episode? Just enjoy
We
it.
hope this discussion of Vampire the Masquerade LARP fills you with holiday cheer, and you can sit down by the fire, the stockings hung with care, and listen to us talk about being storytellers for a vampire LARP set in Chicago.
Yeah, what he said.
Yes, that's what I meant by experience.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been curious about live action role play beyond just a fascination with it. Like I think there are things in this world where you do or do not realize that they are your thing. If it's my cousin, he didn't know he was into salsa dancing until his wife made him do it, and now he does it whenever he can, right? So I guess maybe that's the way I view live action role play, is that, I was never really super interested in it, but the fact that you guys were doing it, I thought was fascinating. And so I never shied away from hearing about the particulars of it, but I have yet to actually try it out.
Okay. Rich, do you have any experience with Vampire the Masquerade and live action role playing?
Oh, do I? Maybe too much, honestly. Yeah, I think I was probably 14 the first time I played in a Vampire LARP, Vampire the Masquerade. That was started out at a convention in Chicago. And I went on to be a semi-regular player at some games in the suburbs. Went on to play in one of those large, horrendous networked games in Chicago. Ran that game for, I want to say, about 2 years. I was one of the storytelling staff, and then kicked off and started my own little group of Vampire the Requiem when that came out. And I think I ran that group for, I think, 2 years as well. And I believe it continued for about 2 years after I left. A little bit more here and there, but that's the bulk of it.
I'm going to throw out a hot take. As a system, Requiem's better. Deal with it. Deal with it, old people.
Yep. 100% correct.
Yep. No idea what that means, but I'm here for it.
It just, it actually like had mechanics for, what it means to be a vampire, and, like how you interact with other ones and why you would do the things you do instead of just go read every book or whatever. It was a much more well thought out, which, is not actually a knock on the original Vampire. They had the inertia of being the ones that basically create an entire genre of role playing that had never existed. But
So
to do it
explain
as
that then.
enthusiastic amateurs who became wildly successful, and probably not a lot of people said no.
Okay, so for
You tried
people like
something new,
me,
they did it better.
explain it then.
Explain what?
Explain what a live action role playing experience is. What is LARPing? What goes into it for the uninitiated?
You are a monster to avoid becoming a monster. Did I get it right, Rich?
Well, I think that's right for vampire, but if we want to do we want to give
Mhm.
if we're doing like absolute, do we want to talk about real quick LARPing
Yes.
in general?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's okay. Stands for live action role playing. If you the standard spiel is take a role playing game that you play sitting down, but you play it standing up, and you're actually acting as your character. Vampire LARPs were definitely not the first games like that, but they were they're so many people's first entryway into that world, and usually oftentimes the only thing they end up doing as well. So, you had a bunch of people doing all kinds of different types of, playing pretend, LARPing, whatever. And it's meshed with this, Vampire the Masquerade tabletop game. Kind of makes a really nice pairing, since most of the stories that they talk about in the tabletop game are these political, very political intrigue kind of things. So you're well, why am I not just at this party that we're describing? Why are we not just doing this if, we're not doing all this stuff? And then you play it for a couple of years and you find out why you're not doing that. So you basically take this game that's supposedly about deep political intrigue and all that stuff. And you combine it with the game that people were already playing, which is mostly about hitting people with sticks. And you take out the hitting people with sticks because you didn't want to have people doing that. I think that's
Right. Okay, so
mesh those together. Yeah.
So it's go ahead, Jesse.
People can get really elaborate with their costuming, plays for long arcs. A lot of your interaction, unlike a traditional tabletop role-playing game so much, you can go an entire session in at least a vampire LARP without ever talking to the storyteller, which is the GM, just talking to other players. And to me, that was one of the things that was kind of, the allure of it, is just I am just having these conversations in character. Are they great conversations? No. Do they rely on tropes? Yes. Do you probably, if you have one, go smoke a clove cigarette and wax poetic about the torturous existence of your unlife? Yes, but then someone else is standing there. They might recommend you for extra experience points. So hooray. I don't know. It's a very different experience from tabletop play. I've never done the fantasy stuff where you hit people with swords. For those of you who may be familiar with it only from memes, or the lightning bolt thing. I have not played that style, but having done the vampire one, I can sort of see the appeal. I just have neither the time nor money.
You mean that your experiences playing vampire LARPs have led you to want to hit people?
Yes. My brief experience as an assistant storyteller in your game just strengthened that even more.
Okay, so the way I envision this is the weekend is coming up and somebody slips a dossier under your door and it has all this information about what's supposed to happen in the game. And you've got a character and you show up to the location. And as soon as you walk in that door, it's game on. Everybody's playing their character. The scene is set and everything, you're interacting as if you are your character. Is that more or less what's happening?
Replace the dossier with a post or play by post AOL chat room conducted by messages. And you're there.
Yeah, I think the version in my head is more of what you guys described, plus that movie, The Game, starring Michael Douglas. Because when I think about where you could go, yeah, that's what I'm like. That's the fullest extent of what a live action role playing game is in my brain. So what was your guys' characters? then like what was your favorite LARPing character?
I don't know if I can talk about it in 2023 because there may be a fair amount of edgelordiness okay, so people who will listen to the episodes of the podcast we've already recorded, or I don't know where this comes in time, you'll notice a theme that as I am a fairly normal human worm baby, when I role play, I prefer to play characters who are in some way monstrous and inhuman, and then to try to find the humanity within it. We'll tack that last part on to make me sound good. But in Rich's game, I played, I don't know how inside baseball to get with this. It's a character story. What do you think, Rich? Just the high notes? He looked like
I think we do high notes. I think if anyone's listening who's like intimately familiar with Vampire the Requiem, they'll probably pick up on the bits that are important. I mean, you can say Lancia Sanctum.
Yes, he was
not
Lancia Sanctum, Bishop Sherman Barnes. He was some weird bloodline whose name I don't remember, but it made him basically like a corpse. Like the Requiem version of the Samedi, sort of, or Harbingers of Skulls, or whatever they're calling them, for those who know non-Requiem vampire. And basically, he was just... the purpose of his religious faith was to remind humanity that only through prayer are they saved, because the night is dark and full of terrors. How's that for some mixed nerd culture metaphor? And so he was basically a death Buddhist on the path to losing his mind. And he would do things to terrorize the community where he hunted and lived, to remind them that only through prayer to God would there be saved. I want to talk about Operation Release the Bats, but and I would come up with plots based on Birthday Party and Tom Waits songs.
I could probably, I don't know. It's a lot harder for me to like, I think I would say since the question was, what character did you play that is the most maybe, similar vibes as being like, I want to play like the monstrous person. I was maybe not seeing the humanity in this as much, but I think the LARP character that I played the longest and probably the most was a political fixer who was sort of the leader of a weird self-help cult, but in a really janky way. Jesse, this was not in a game that you were in. This was actually the character I was playing down in the Champaign-Urbana LARP.
We drove down there once.
We drove down for the Requiem LARP. This was in there. This was predating. This was the Vampire the Masquerade. If you're familiar with Vampire the Masquerade, I was playing a follower of Set. It was the first character I played in that group. And the sort of stereotypical view of this vampire clan, I think, in the game is that they're like, they're like the drug dealer. If you've ever seen, there was a Partnership for a Drug-Free America, PSA, in which a drug dealer, this very cartoon 80s kind of Double Dragon type guy, is trying to talk up drugs to a kid, and he's slowly turning into a snake at the end. That is what the followers of Set are, because they literally are drug dealers who turn into snakes. I'm very sure that this came from this one 15-second PSA. And as I talk about followers of Set, I think that also opens a whole can of worms on the general tone of cultural sensitivity of Vampire the Masquerade and that genre of gaming as well, because this is absolutely the kind of game that'd be like, let's take like some real world mythology. Let's not give a shit whether anyone actually follows this in reality and whether this is a real religion, and let's just turn them into snakes or something like that. Because that shit was all over that game. But I was trying to like break the stereotype of like the sleazy street drug dealer from the after school special and turn him into like a political self-help cultist guy. And what I realized now looking back on it is like I was basically playing Roger Stone. And that's very troubling to me.
With the tattoo and everything, I hope.
I think at one point there was an in joke about me literally. I don't think it was a Nixon back tattoo, but there was something like that with this character in the game that I was playing in like 2005, maybe.
What's hilarious about that concept of the self-help cultist and like self-help cult or whatever and political operative is that is entirely what they are in the current edition of the game. And they've rebranded as the Ministry to be less problematic.
They're stealing these ideas from me, I tell you.
I know. Ahead of his time, Rich Ranallo. Yeah. So, yeah. My first LARP character was a Setite as well. And I'm wondering now, looking back, like a 16-year-old kid shows up to your LARP and you let him play one of the restricted clans. I think it's because I had snakeskin leather pants.
Yeah. Can we... So... Sorry, I'm just that just reminds me of a weird tangent, which is the persistent debate over people who are under 18 playing in these games.
I was in danger.
Well, because sorry, this is probably not like part of the plan or whatever, but you saying that reminded me of the fact that like. I recall as a storyteller, one of the staff running this game that was part of a nationwide network, really worldwide network of vampire games, One World by Night in Chicago. There was this like persistent thing where people would be like hemming and hawing. They'd be like, this like 17-year-old kid wants to come in and play this, whatever. And we were all of us in charge of the game were in this really awkward position of being like, well, I don't want literal children playing in this game. Not that there was like a whole lot that was like super objectionable or whatever. Like there really wasn't. I think most of the content here is like PG-13. If
I think for me in a similar situation, I wouldn't worry about the content of the game itself.
Right. But so we would be in this position of being like, well, I don't, you can't play if you're under 18. But literally every single person who was there was currently in their 20s or 30s or 40s and had started playing the game when they were under 18. Like, it's like smoking. No one starts when they're legally of age to do it. And like all of us were like, well, yeah, I was 14. I was coming to this game. Like there was other 14-year-olds. There were people in their 20s that were like people who in hindsight are maybe really creepy, like considerably older. And it was always so weird for us to be like, because like I don't think it's wrong to say you have to be 18. Just because it like lets everyone know that what they can say, because you're dealing with this large group of players. But it was just also, I always thought it was like humorously hypocritical of all of us to be like, well, I was fine when I was 14. But
yeah, well, in the larger LARPs too, the subtext, I'm just going to mention it because there are horror stories out in the community from these days is like, I wouldn't worry about the content of the game, but some of the players I would not want in a dark room alone with an underage person. Like there's, and not necessarily from a malicious perspective, but there are just some boundary issues that you find, and then possibly maliciousness as well. I don't know. Yeah. It's, there's a wide age spread at a LARP, especially back in the mid 90s when I started playing.
Yeah. I mean, that was a different time too, because back then, or at least I feel this way, this is my experience in a non-LARP capacity. It's like I found social acceptance through gaming. My first role-playing game group were people who were older than me, and they were theater kids essentially. And like, if like it seemed weird to me back then that we should restrict anybody from a role-playing game environment of any kind, because this is a way for us to come together. Like, gaming is very social, but I think especially in today's environment, you would have to do that. It would have to be restricted that way.
I mean, I
What
think
would be worse to run with underage people, like a small game with like 10 to 12 players or a huge game with 40 to 50?
which would be worse.
Which would be, yeah.
Oh, the large game, easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all right, there's potentially a tangent there about my first tabletop group, based on what Matt just said, but yeah, I mean, I think like if you're like 6 people getting together, play a tabletop game, and everyone there knows everyone, I think it's a little easier to be like, hey, this is a 14-year-old. Let's play this game as appropriate for a 14-year-old. To something where, you know, most of like Jesse said, most of the interaction that you have is with players. They're with people who just showed up that night. And it's a little bit more like you're running an event more so than it is you're like narrating a story. I think that the question marks are definitely there. Yeah. But I would absolutely feel better with a group of 10 to 12 people where everyone can like see everyone and knows who everyone is. And maybe in a group of 10 to 12 people, I'd be like, no, you can't come in here if you're 17. Like,
yeah. I have a rather ribald story to share, if that's all right. We haven't talked about adult content on this one, but so one of the things in my LARP experience that I thought was funny as a teenager is it really gave me empathy for older people. And what's so funny now is the people who I thought of as being really old then when I was a teenager were probably in their mid 30s. I had no way to judge, you know, like, but there was this elder goth couple who were probably in their early to mid 30s who were really cool. I'm not going to name names or character names because I don't want to, you know, shame them. But, you know, one of the things, like I was all punk and edgy. I'd talk about anything. We were talking after game and I was like, oh yeah, man, me and my girlfriend who would come to the game, like, you know, they're like, I think they might have asked me about sex. Like, and I was like, it didn't send off any red flags because I was an idiot. And this is not a story of abuse, by the way, just no, don't worry. And I was like, yeah, man, we always have to, you know, be in my car, blah, blah. They're like, oh, well, you can use our bed.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a very
so I went over to their apartment one night and they were watching a movie and said, here you go. And they had left bondage toys out. And once the romantic occasion was finished, when we emerged sheepishly from the room, they held up scorecards. And wow. These are the people you meet at a LARP.
I'm speechless.
Yeah, so there's reasons we were a little apprehensive about having underage people at the games.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
That makes sense. So what goes into being a storyteller then, Rich? Well, you said that there's a staff. How many people are on the storytelling staff? And then what is everybody's roles?
Let's see. When the game that the game I started on, I think there were 4 storytellers, and it was between the 4 people. Very there wasn't a lot of structure. We would just all sort of like have our own little, like, essentially you would be the ones like coming up with like the meta events of going on. Like, I mean, it honestly, this was like around the dawn of like MMORPGs. And there's a lot of similarities when you're talking about like just the logistics of running this thing. You would come up with like stuff to happen, which could be like new characters coming in that people interact with and whatever. I always thought of it as like the players by themselves were just like a big stock pot. They were all interacting with each other, and like there was enough going on that in an average night, if they were all just sort of like talking to each other and whatever, like it would be low key interesting enough to keep them coming back and whatever. But like your job as a storyteller was like toss new ingredients in, basically. So sometimes that might mean like, oh, there's this really old vampire who comes to town. He has his agenda and he's recruiting allies or whatever. Or, you know, the more common sort of like lazy thing is like, oh, the evil vampires attack. That happened all the time in some of these games.
You can make a lot of hay with last week. One of the players really fucked up and revealed the existence of vampires.
Yeah, there's like it's one of those, like, it was one of those very light touch things where like you could just be like, what are the consequences of things that happened last time? But also you have to like referee stuff between people who are playing pretend with their favorite little character and whatever. And sometimes
they get intense.
You need to adjudicate some petty beefs and stuff. It prepared me for working in both formal electoral politics and left-wing organizing. It's same group dynamics no matter where you go.
Ironically, I'm going to say the same thing for corporate America.
It's groups of people are the same everywhere. It's
so true.
It's one of those things, no matter how many times I learn it for the first time, I'm still surprised, and I never just fully internalize that.
So what's an example then of a petty argument that comes up between two players? Is it like, well, I'm trying to drink your blood, well, I'm going to drink your blood? Like, forgive the lack of familiarity with what goes on.
No. That's basically it. Yeah, you're
okay.
You're hitting on it. I mean, there's rules. So who drinks whose blood is like, you can figure that out. That's objective, right? And I think probably not surprising how people interpret things like the word objective. But my favorite example of the pettiest of beefs is there was in a group I was running, there was a feud between like one guy and like a group of other guys, I'm gonna say. And the structure of where we were playing was we were playing on the third floor of a building, and you would come up to the second floor to do sign in and everything like that. So the second floor of this building was all out of character. It was all just players being themselves. It was a sign in sheet. And the group of guys side of this feud had gotten there on time, had showed up. They were doing their thing. The one guy who they had it in for walked up, looked at the sign-in sheet, saw who had checked in that day, and was like, well, I'm just visiting. I'm not actually here. Because if he had like signed in, he would have like been there as his character and presumably could have gotten like jumped and killed or something like that. That was the concern. And the guy, and then like, this was true. The guys who were like hang out there were like waiting for him to be there. But one of them happened to like get wind of the fact that this guy, because like the other thing he did was like he didn't leave, he just like stayed there. It was like, no, I'm just chilling, whatever. So I ended up having to adjudicate between this one guy who was like cheating, I guess, I don't know, by like incorporating outside information, and these other people who were getting like really, really annoying, including one guy who like literally was among the people who was like waiting to jump this one dude. And this is like February in Chicago. This one dude was like so intense that like he wanted to fucking fight me. And I'm just like, I'm sitting at this check-in table. He's like, look, like we came here out with like this was like we knew we were gonna do this. He's cheating. He saw this sheet. He knew that this was gonna go on. And if you don't keep the game going for another like hour past when we were legally allowed to be there, when we were rented the space, then like you're taking his side and like this is bullshit, whatever. And at one point he takes off his coat. He's like, I'll be waiting for you outside. And he like storms out. And I was just like, can someone go bring him his coat, because he's going to be there for a while if he's waiting for me to come outside. It's like, yeah, I'm not getting into a fight with this guy.
Is this in the Requiem game?
No. This was the Masquerade game. It was a guy who I'm not naming names. It was a guy who later played in the Requiem game.
I feel like I know who it is.
Yeah, you did. You did. But yeah, like the idea of someone getting into a fist fight over a vampire game was kind of the funniest shit I could possibly imagine. That's a petty beef. That's a petty beef.
That's a great segue. And now it's time to endure the lightning round of AI generated questions.
Oh.
I prepared by asking a chatbot, what are some funny questions to ask someone about a vampire LARP? Here we are. This is what the brain trust of everyone's writing in the world thinks. Actually, it's probably just all based on Enron email, so we'll take that, whatever. Have you ever encountered a vampire player who took their character's thirst for blood a little too seriously and started eyeing other players suspiciously, other than me?
Yes, and I shouldn't comment further.
Okay. Did you ever have to deal with a player who thought they were the ultimate vampire and demanded everyone address them as Count or Countess at all times? Or whatever real word version of that there is.
The closest I can think of to that was a guy who, when I was starting up the Requiem game, there was a long spin up period where I was like talking to people who were getting characters together and stuff like that. There was a guy who, this is a weird, apparently sign-in sheets are the source of all these problems. There was a guy who pitched to me his character concept before the first night of the game. Pitched to me, part of his character concept was he was like, I'll wear a mask. Pitched to me wearing a mask. Pitched to me, okay, wear a mask. Like that's your costume, right? You're all spooky people. Just wear a mask. That's fine. And then he got there, and the software, the database software that I was using to operate the game, printed out a sign-in sheet that had the character's name, the player's name, and a little checkbox, and you would just check it as you came in. And this guy saw that and lost his shit, because he was like, well, I told you I'd be wearing a mask. I'm like, yeah, and you're wearing a mask. I see that. He's like, no, he thought that by telling me that he was wearing a mask, that he was telling me that the other players would not know that it was this guy who some of them knew who was playing this character. He thought, I, as a person, as a player, will be wearing a mask, and therefore I want. And he lost his shit and just left. He just fucking took off. He never came back. And he wrote me a really long email about how offended he was about this. I'm like, if you wanted to be clear that like you were the big spooky guy, I would have said okay, and also that's fucking weird, so no. I thought you were just saying I'm going to wear a mask. Is it okay if I wear a mask? Yes, obviously. You don't need to ask me about that.
In a game that's so heavily built on interpersonal communication, the interpersonal communication abilities of the players are, there's a graph somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. I don't know. I had fun. I went to one right before the pandemic here in Oklahoma City. I had a good time. It was Masquerade, fell into the old tropes, only felt silly for the first 20 minutes. And I was just like, oh, whatever. And it didn't end in a massive 20-player fight scene that bogs down time, forever.
Well, if you'd have kept going, it probably would have. But
yeah, that's the thing. I always thought maybe as a storyteller that one of your goals for every session is to not have it devolve into like a 20-person mass combat with like 15 minutes until the event space closes.
Yeah.
Oh, and then this is the other one. I think everybody may have heard a story about, most people have heard a story about this, if not experienced it themselves in the LARP community. Has anyone ever mistaken your LARP group for a cult of vampire enthusiasts in public, leading to some interesting encounters or funny misunderstandings?
Pitch to me.
The best example that I could think of is actually fairly harmless. Well, okay. I have two good answers to this. One was playing in Naperville, Illinois. During the summers, like during the colder months, we'd play inside one game store, but during the summers, we'd be like all over the downtown area, mostly in this one park. And it was actually a lot of fun. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like it was a fucking blast. As a 15-year-old, it was great. But the people who ran the game had in advance contacted the Naperville police to tell them that this was going on, because they were like, and they gave them a capsule description of what playing live action vampire was like. And the cops as an institution could not give less of a shit about it. These were not, I mean, this is like, upper middle class white suburb community. These were not cops who were looking for an excuse to like brutalize people. Not looking for an excuse to brutalize these people, let's say. But what the cops took from this was that, because they were told, well, part of the in universe theme of this is you're not supposed to let people know you're a vampire. So like, don't worry, we won't be acting too weird, because everyone in character is supposed to be acting normal. What the cops took from this is that it was a game where the cops tried to play Spot the LARPer. So the cops thought they were playing the game kind of in a weird way. So we had a number of people who were like having this, like, there's one in particular where like a group of people were having this conversation. They're like talking in character or whatever. And this like actual cop kind of like walks up to them and be like, you're playing the vampire game, hand over the fangs. And they like, he thought that he had like tagged them out or something like that. And we were like, the whole group was kind of like, well, they're like, well, no. And then they're telling the cop no, which has a whole other, connotation to it. But the cops literally thought that like, this was like, the people who were in the game were kind of like, well, why did you think we were doing the game where like the point was to hide from the police? Because that would be like probably actually dangerous. Right. And these were cops who had been posted to a park in the middle of Naperville, so they didn't have anything better to do, clearly. The other one was a vampire game that was going on in a hotel where one of the rituals, one of the things that happened, there was a scene where a small group of people were doing like this like blood sacrifice ritual, also Lancea Sanctum, probably not surprising. That involved one of them in a hotel room, dipping her hand and forearm in red liquid latex, and then like holding it up. It was just like look, it looked fucking sick. Like this fucking ruled. And then marching while chanting in fake Latin through the entire hotel to the ballroom where the actual event was taking place. And that scared the shit out of a bunch of people. Like, maybe understandably so. I don't know. Because she's just like dripping what looked like incredibly red blood. And the compromise that they came up with, this became a national policy in this group was that if you did something like that, because like the description of what they're doing was written into the book, like this was like a thing that you do, was that you couldn't use red. So like apparently right after that, people were doing that with like purple liquid latex. Well, that just looks weird.
Wow.
That's the two top examples I can think of that happening.
I've got a similar story related to me. I'm a transplant where I live now. Related to me by a local who said that the vampire LARP was expelled from one of the local conventions because of, a LARP-related incident that I think happened in the lobby of an incredibly expensive hotel downtown in Chicago. I think actually the con got kicked out of the hotel for this. There was a baby sacrifice ritual involving a doll, a baby doll.
Oh, wow.
That was done off the second floor atrium, like at like 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, like in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And let's just say the normies were a little weirded out. And that's secondhand for me. I was the problem for outdoor LARP games because I just join in. Like without checking in to register. I just, throw off the vibe of like, because the way I dressed in high school, like, oh, that dude must be playing. Like, no, actually, this is my normal.
Yeah,
we get clothes, but you're outside in a public area. Yeah.
I remember there was
Go ahead, Matt. Oh, okay. We played in college in Muncie, Indiana, in the college part of town, a game that was outdoor and cross public areas of the main college strip and never had any issues. Which says some about how exciting and vibrant the main strip of Muncie, Indiana college strip was on a Saturday night in the year 1998.
Oof.
There was a dude, there was a vampire LARP I was playing in the next town over from where I grew up, Lombard, Illinois. And also in the same town. So we were in like a comic shop and like in the street in front of the comic shop. Also in the same town, there was an abandoned Ovaltine factory. And that was basically where if you lived in this town and you were like a punk kid, you were hanging out in the abandoned Ovaltine factory. That's where like the bad kids hung out. It is unsurprisingly right now has been converted into incredibly upscale condos, which are more expensive than most of the real estate in Chicago. Not surprising. But I recall being out on the street in front of this comic shop with me and my other nerds, and this one like real gutter punk looking kid sort of like rolls up on one of those, like, it's like he was riding like a kid's bike, like a kid's mountain bike, right? Long trench coat, fucking dragging on the ground behind him. He's like, hey, you playing vampire? We play an Ovaltine style, and pulls out a fucking crowbar from his like jacket. And we're all just like, are you here to beat us up with a crowbar? What the fuck is going on? I don't think he was actually playing vampire unless they were playing vampire in the sense of yelling, I am a vampire, while beating someone with a crowbar.
Somewhere a dark carnival is missing its juggalo.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. Wow.
This guy was anarchist. This guy was anarchist vampire. I'm very sure of this now.
Compared to such costume makeup acts as Hatchet Riders, Ride or Die.
Right.
Wow.
Poor kid, anarchist vampires. I've got older. I still think it's really funny, but I also have a lot of sympathy for that poor kid in Nebraska.
Yeah. I don't know what he's up to,
but it's still really funny.
Oh, it's hilarious. I actually made the Hatchet Riders NPCs in my game.
Oh yeah, in my Monster Hearts game, one of the cultist characters hung out with a bunch of juggalos named Cotton Candies, and what was the other one's name? She wound up making one of them murder the other one at the behest of her dark patron. It was a fun game.
Yeah.
So Matt, seriously, you gonna play some Vampire LARP now?
Yeah, I think I am. I think we should set that as a stretch goal. You know, if the Mantis takes off, if we could get X number of patrons, then we'll force Matt to do his first live action role play, and in his 40s. And what do you think?
That's the time to start.
I'm reasonably sure that if I went and looked up like the Chicago group that I used to like run, there's probably like some of the exact same people hanging out there still. And that would be like, that's always been like too depressing for me to like go and look up. I'm like, I don't know if I want to actually hang out with, I don't know. Some of those people are cool, but I'm not sure any of the cool ones are still there.
Got you. We have any more generated questions?
You hear me? Did you hit the button on your mic?
I think you might have your volume down, Jose. I was just hearing Matt.
Oh.
Do you have any more questions, Jesse? Any more user generated or AI generated questions?
No, only the ones that were like the real questions, but I think we covered it. Oh, okay. So I had a friend who was real curious about Vampire Life, and she talked me into saying I would do it. So I backed the War Ages book on Kickstarter. I got some ideas. Do you have any tips for setting up my first LARP vampire game, Rich?
Setting it up like from scratch kind of thing?
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. It's tricky for me because like I love like high concept ideas. And I think that like, that's not what a lot of people going in. I guess if you're looking to involve people who like are in this world and have been for some time, you kind of got to just give them a blank slate to play with. The game we ran started out with like very much not a blank slate, and a lot of people had a hard time sort of grasping that. If it's like aimed at like people who are totally new, I think you got to swing the other way and like give them much more of a structure, like give them a reason why they're hanging out here, stuff like that. I think that, I leaned a little hard into like having kind of like codified like player interaction norms. I think that you do kind of have to have that, because if you were running a tabletop role-playing game with a small group of people, you can sit there and you can tell them, and you can have a conversation about what the like expectations about the world and how you interact with it are. If you are hosting an event where theoretically anyone can walk through the door, you don't know what they're bringing with them. So if you want something to be true in the minds of somebody coming in, like you do have to like write it down on a piece of paper and show it to them. So like think about what the assumptions you're making are. Other than that, yeah, I don't know that I could possibly give any advice on that. But yeah, I guess I would also say like, think about it like you're running an event first and the game second. Like you're creating a space where people are going to be hanging out. They're going to need to interact. Think about what they need. And then the game stuff should follow from that.
That's really good advice.
Hopefully it works. I don't know.
All right. And if we don't have anything else, we'll just leave it there. We'll go through our where can people find more information about you. Rich, why don't you go first? This has been our bonus episode, but in case this is disjointed from our first episode, where can people find more information about you, Velvet Generation, all the good stuff?
If I am going down with the ship on Twitter. If anyone wants to find me on Twitter, they can find it at Personal Beavis. I will sometimes talk about gaming shit. I'll sometimes talk about like there'll be some off-color jokes that I'm not going to bring up here. But if they want to look up Velvet Generation, best place to do that is Velvet_GEN, Velvet Gen at Twitter. It's also on Blue Sky. I don't post terribly much on the game account, but that in combination with the Velvet Generation episode here should tell you everything you need to know about that game.
Awesome. Thanks. And Jesse, where can people find more information about you on the internet?
I am at JingoistFet on Twitter, and we are at Jaunty Mantis on Twitter. We are up to 3 followers now, thanks to the power of TTRPG Thursday.
Whoa.
Where I went through like 5 of them and just commented who we are and what we're doing. And we gained 2 followers.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Let's see what our retention rate is.
I know, right? Let's see. We'll see.
All right. And look forward to another banter topic in the future. And for Jesse, Rich, and myself, my name is Matt, which I keep forgetting to bring that up when I introduce the damn show, but that's who I am. And get out there and play some fucking games.
Yep, play some fucking games or shit. I don't know.
All right.